to do that, but it's the extent to which, what's the question here? How much would one say in something like the Bernie campaign, or any of these other examples I said? To what extent is what seems like a position of leadership really subordinated to a democratic process of decision making that is able actually to do the strategic things? Okay, so you said about it might be helpful if I would just give the classic. So the classic for me, this is someone else might give a different one, but the first one that comes to mind for me is in the revolutionary communist tradition. Like even in the one that calls itself democratic centralism. So the one that's coming to mind for me, I could do Lenin and Trotsky. I was thinking of Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci as an example, where he talks about his definition of democratic centralism is the metaphor he uses is they're like gears that fit together. There is from above the leadership that has to mesh like gears with a rising from below. And so that this notion of the strategic leadership, the party who can make decisions, is really meshing with the activism of those at the base. Does that make sense? And so the strategy of this whole thing, not strategy, I shouldn't use that term. The proposition here is just about inverting those two roles. And like I say, it's not like that inversion gives us anything more than a framework for thinking. That's what so let me then, what I feel like, what I've got prepared now is for how should we call them? Maybe slogans or catchwords. So Tony and I kind of work this way, which I'm sure all of you have done, like writing a paper, where you come up with the title first and then you figure out what it's about later. So we work this way often. It's like we have a slogan first and then we kind of fill it in. So let me give you 4 slogans, and what I'm meaning these to do, just to remember, I'm trying to to fill out some, both in what sense the contemporary multitude, like people today, are capable of strategy and democracy, that's really going completely together, and it's sort of giving indications of where a movement towards that might come from. That's what I'm hoping all 4 of these do. Okay, so here's the 4. And I'll say, when I say them at first, they might not all make sense, but I'll say them, and then I think afterwards, if I review them, they'll make more sense. The first one about social production. The second one about extractivism, like the way that capital functions through extractivism. Okay, the third, the entrepreneurship of the multitude, and the fourth is about the common, like the common against property. So, okay, they might not have made any sense. I was just looking at you all in the first round. The second, so the first one about social production, the claim is simple, and each of these I'm going to give, in some ways, underdeveloped arguments, but I hope they'll at least be suggestive. And the proposition here really is that economic production today is increasingly social in 2 senses. First, that the relationships of production are increasingly social, like that we increasingly produce together in networks of cooperation. And the second is that the products are increasingly social. Like, so in addition to the production of material goods, material commodities, a lot of economic production today is centered around, in fact, I would even argue the center of gravity of contemporary capitalist production is centered on the production of immaterial and really social goods, by which I mean ideas, images, code, affects, social relations in that sense. And so, yeah, okay, let me first give you an example of the kind of thing that might be work like that. What I'm thinking of is the kind of work that is social in this sense. And I think you'll see later why I would want to put so much, or find an importance, something rich or promising in that. There you go. So, thanks. Here's one example of social production. A figure that's good for this for me is a hospice nurse. You see, I've completely changed level, I guess, of discourse. And last year, both my parents died. I worked with a lot of hospice nurses, so I learned what they do. And it's amazing. So hospice nurse is generally the one who is supposed to work with someone who's in the last 6 months of life. And so they do a lot of material things. You know, they tend to wounds, they administer medication, stuff like that. But mostly what they do is create these social networks. I mean, they're dealing with the emotional life, of course, of the patient, you know, helping the person die. But even more than that, with the, and you know, of course, they help communicate with the doctors. That's another sort of social level. But I was thinking more of how they like tend to that whole friend network and the whole family network. Like the hospice nurse really not only manages communication, but tends to everyone's affective life. You know, so what the actual is being produced is, of course, something material. Like I said, you know, dealing with the wounds, that's something material. But what's really being produced is something purely social. Purely social in the sense of these affective relationships that are going on. So, so why might you care about that? I think one consequence, this is another of my large claims that are coming through this, is that it changes the nature